So
That's right. That's right. Come on, the sunset. I got to get to bed now already.
sunrise, sunset, sunrise.
I know exactly that. Was that a Rodney Dangerfield reference you just did there?
Exactly.
I know exactly. God, that's how well I know you. See, that's frightening right there.
Okay, Stephen Halmerick. Okay, this guy said, "G'day from Australia, Sydney, Australia." And he says that. I didn't even make that up, Dave. He writes that right in the beginning. So I wanted to thank you for keeping the Van Halen movement here alive. I really enjoy listening to your podcast each month, and I keep up the great work. We haven't been especially well serviced by Van Halen down here in Australia over these years. The first time they visited was 1998 with Gary on lead vocals. It was actually a great show and my first Van Halen show I ever saw. Gary did a great job of doing both Sam and Dave eras, and Eddie was in great form. The band never toured the first time around with Dave, although Dave came as a solo act around 1986, and I went out to the show, and it was absolutely phenomenal. We never got to see the Sammy era of Van Halen down here, but they did tour with Dave at the Stone Music Festival in April of 2013, with other headliners being Aerosmith and Billy Joel, and I went to that show. My best Van Halen experiences were in 2008 and 2015, when I saw them in Chicago and Dallas, respectively. So he wanted to know, I was wondering if anybody else has traveled as far as I did from Sydney, Australia to Chicago and back again to see Van Halen. Or do I hold some type of record? I have to say it was totally worth it. After being a Van Halen fan since the early 80s, it was an amazing experience to see the original band, even if it was 30 years later. The last time he saw Van Halen was in Dallas in September 2015, where I just happened to be there for work at that time. Paid almost $1,000 for a VIP package, which included watching a sound check of Eddie, Alex, and Wolfgang, and the seats right up front for the full concert. It was an amazing experience being so close to Eddie, and without a doubt the best show of the four that I have seen. He also said he started listening to our podcast. Like most fans, I was very keen to hear about another tour, and he wants them to come back. And as time goes by, he says, you have come to the conclusion that we shouldn't expect any more from the band. They have given us so much joy and amazing music over the years, and a lot of drama, and we should just thank the universe that we have seen them, and they're one of the greatest rock bands of all time, and he keeps the podcast coming. Steven, you know what? I'm really sorry that Van Halen has not serviced Australia the way they should. It really is a shame. And really what it comes down to, Stephen, is mismanagement. It is management that makes those things happen. I've said this before in another podcast, and I'll repeat it here again. Bon Jovi is an international band who can draw huge crowds from around the world because of Doc McGee. Doc McGee, who is Kiss's manager currently, he put them on tour around the world, and he had them play in front of everybody in order to give them a global audience. Van Halen did not do that. They stuck with America, and they did a little of some European tours and stuff like that. But when it came to the Sammy era, they really dropped the ball and really didn't do much overseas stuff at all. It did a little bit of Japan for the OU812 shows, and then not much at all. And then they ended up opening for Bon Jovi on the Balance Tour in 1995, of all things. So that really comes down to management. But I'm glad that you got to see Van Halen. But it just goes to show the band what kind of struggle and the dedication our fans have, that they go all the way across the globe to see them live. You know, just they take that for granted, which is part of one of the complaints we have. What do you think about that, Dave?
Man, I give that guy a lot of credit, because I don't know if I would, especially Van Halen these days, man, I don't know if I would
travel that far,
go to another country for a show, because, you know, they don't exactly have a good track record of keeping all their shows. I think that guy, he was in and out of there like 2 or 3 days or something like that.
Yeah,
I mean, it was crazy. I mean, you've got to win an award, dude, of some sort, right? I mean, Australia to Chicago?
Absolutely.
Like, wow, God bless you.
That's really far. I mean, I can't.
You are dedicated,
What do you
dude.
think
I'll
that
give him
is, Dave? Like 16 hours in a plane?
Oh, Dave.
I mean, it's really ridiculous.
At least. I mean, Dave, Dave, it's got to be closer to a day probably if you had a connecting flight. No, really.
Yeah,
I mean, I know people who are going to Asia and from here. Yeah. I mean, granted, we're on the East Coast.
Yeah.
But that's like a day.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a direct flight is like 18 hours if you're lucky. So.
Yeah. He would probably have to go to New York and then Chicago, right?
I don't know. Well, I don't even know which way he's going.
Yeah.
Probably not. I mean, he probably have to go to California. I don't even know. He probably has a direct flight to Chicago. Anyway.
Okay.
God bless you, and I'm glad the band actually played the dates.
Yeah, thank God. Yeah, imagine if they canceled. Right? So now number 7 comes from your buddy Ron, Dave. He says your buddy Ron. He says in the last cast you were a little bit lost and disconcerting about the jump disaster that occurred in Greensboro show. And he said the writer was referring to the 2007 Greensboro show where a tuning problem affected the closing song, which is Jump, and it is well documented, and he gave us the YouTube links. And he says there's an attempt at explaining what happened as well, and another YouTube link. And he said in the comments of the second video, look for M. Finster, which he claims is Alan Fitzgerald's brother, who has some interesting things to say. What did you make of that whole Jump video, Dave, with the Greensboro situation?
Well, admittedly, I'm no musician, but to my ears, the keyboard sounded fine, and it was the guitar that was off.
But apparently, it was the keyboards that were throwing off the guitar, right?
Well, right, and I just said to my ears,
right?
But apparently, in all the videos I've seen, including some guy who actually did a really pretty in-depth analysis of this,
that's what he's referring to.
Apparently, the keyboard, the pre-taped keyboard was apparently off like a quarter. I can't even say beat. I'm not a musician, but like a quarter tone or whatever.
Right.
And that just threw Ed and the rest of the band. Well, not the rest of the band, because Dave actually sounded good. But I guess, when you're expecting the keyboard to sound a certain way and all of a sudden it doesn't, and now you're fumbling to catch up in the middle of the song, that's got to be tough.
Right.
So, either way, stuff happens. It's live. What are you going to do? Not the band's finest hour. Although the comments from the individual who claimed to be Fitz's brother were very interesting.
Yeah.
So if they were true.
Right. That's interesting. I agree with you. That sounded very much off from the guitar standpoint, but apparently there was the tape. But I don't understand how a pre-tape could be off key. I mean, that's kind of weird, no?
Yeah, no, that is weird, and I don't understand how. And that's why, I'm sure Ed was thrown off, because you would never think that would happen. But I'm no technology whiz, but somehow it happened, and they got thrown off by it. So
right, absolutely. And we're now on to letter number 8, and that is from Ben Levy. And Ben says, I'm listening to your podcast about your comparison of the 2 live albums, and you talked about Sam faking his reaction to You Really Got Me Cabo Wabo song when they came to Mexico on that tour. On the second night, they played You Really Got Me, then Cabo Wabo, and instead of returning into You Really Got Me, Eddie looked at Sam and started playing Talk About Love at the end of it. So, in this case, it was spontaneous. So to Ben, I tell you, okay, that very well may be, but I felt that Sam was playing it up verbally a little bit on the album, and it seems a little bit less than genuine. So that was just my take. I mean, I don't know. It could be wrong. What do you think, Dave?
It's hard to tell with Sam.
Yeah, it is.
It really, the wind can blow either way on that one.
Yeah. So now I have number 9, and this is probably the most interesting letter we have, Dave. Listen to this. This is fresh from the Cabo Wabo shows. This gentleman by the name of James Guy, and James is a longtime listener of ours, and he's been great. I believe he's from Australia as well. He says, hey, Dave, he goes, I just thought you might be interested in this. I met Michael Anthony in Cabo today, and we had a chat. He told me something interesting about Van Halen. I said to him, I saw him in 1998 when Van Halen 3 toured Australia, and that I would have loved to heard the follow-up to VH3 with Gary. He smiled and said, well, let's just say that's not dead yet. And I said, oh, really? That would be awesome. He smiled, and I said, wow. Seems like I got the inside scoop when he smiled. So take that for what it's worth, but he definitely alluded to some kind of current attempt at VH3. What do you make of that, Dave?
I mean, I don't think the band's getting back together with Gary.
I can't imagine.
Right? I mean, the only thing I could think of is that maybe after long last that they are resurrecting some old tracks or demos for a box set, or nobody even does box sets anymore except for Guns N' Roses, right? Or some kind of best of, or Mikey was just pulling his leg. I mean, right? I mean, although I can't really, Mike's not the kind of guy to do that. So
he's not.
I don't know. I don't know. I really don't. That perplexes me.
That
I really
is
can't imagine them
perplexing.
going back to that well.
That is, and to be honest with you, it's not like that's like a lost album. That was all scratch demos. They weren't like fully recorded songs.
Right.
That's the other thing. So I don't know what that's about. I can't imagine that Gary goes back in the band after 11 years of David Lee Roth. I also can't see them releasing material that was only demoed. That is just odd. I mean, James, thank you so much for that info and for the little scoop there. I would love to know where the hell that's going, but I think...
Well, Mike's not even in the band anymore, so, I mean, right? So how would he know?
Yeah, so who knows? Maybe someone's turning to Mike and is just giving him bad info down the pipeline or something. Gary's coming back.
Or Gary is like maybe resurrecting the demos and recording the songs and ask Mikey to come on them or something crazy like that. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, you never know.
Right?
Never know.
Yeah, right.
It's true. Number 10, John Schiller. He says, first off, thanks for the podcast. I listen to them all the time, and they keep me super entertained. My first concert was 5150 in 1986 at the Cow Palace Halloween night. And they ended the tour on November 3rd. In addition, we found a guy named Ricky Rocket handing out flyers that night for their show in San Francisco for a band called Poison. Ricky Rocket's the drummer of Poison. Nice guy, too. Unfortunately, I was a year too young to see 1984, and since then, I'm more of a Dave era fan. Okay, I have a few errors I need to input here. He wanted to tell you, Dave, Motley Crue is not a heavy metal band. Period. This is what he says. Oh, okay. He also says, I also recall over the years that Michael had mentioned that after they performed at the New Halen, Connecticut show, which is New Haven, but they call it New Halen, he went out to a truck to sweeten up his background vocals and add some takes. Of course, I attempted to do research on the net to see if I could find that quote, but I couldn't find it, so it must be in print somewhere in my collection. He also wanted to ask us, lastly, I have a vinyl that is Van Halen at the Whiskey in New Year's Eve 1978. They announced themselves as Warner Brothers recording artists, and they have a few gems on there. Have you heard of this release? The 1978 recordings are fun because you hear them introducing themselves as new songs, and these songs are classic songs that we know that are now 40 years old, which is kind of fun. And they're sort of like a new band, listen to this new track, and it's like Running with the Devil. And I love all the stage banter on those 78 bootlegs, and Dave's all his hosting skills, and you can hear that he's like really high or buzzed most of the time. So that's kind of fun. What do you think, Dave? Have you heard of that 1978 show at the Whiskey?
Yeah, no, that's a fun show.
Yeah.
That's a very fun show. Yeah. I like that a lot. And as far as Motley Crue not being metal, I just want to remind everybody out there that there was a point in time when Motley Crue was slamming Quiet Riot in the press for being a fake metal band. And they were a real metal band. I mean, you had to kind of be around at the time and reading the magazines and hearing but when Quiet Riot hit number one, I mean, there was a lot of jealousy from other bands because they seemingly came out of nowhere. And I mean, not that Motley Crue was unknown. They were an up and coming band, but they were definitely not afraid to sling mud, and they were calling themselves a true metal band. So, I mean, are they like other harder bands out there? No, I mean, certainly not. But I think it's fair to call them a metal band.
Absolutely. Well, Matt Berlin comes in on our number 11 letter, and he says, hey, Daves, I love your podcast and listen to them to and from work. I have no one left to talk to Van Halen about, and all my friends have either moved on or lost interest. Van Halen has been the soundtrack of my life, and I'm a loyal fan. My first time seeing them was on the Fair Warning Tour, and I haven't missed a tour since, with the exception of the Van Halen 3 tour. I even went to the US Festival, and believe it or not, I own the bass guitar that's on the cover of Live Without a Net. Michael used to give basses to his brother Dennis after his tours, and Dennis would sometimes sell them. I picked it up in 1989 from a coworker who was a friend of Dennis. And if I could go back in time, I would love to see that 1979 tour or the 1980 Invasion tour. It's always the ones that you miss that you imagine the most would be the best tour. What was the best time you've seen Van Halen? I know you've discussed what show you would have loved to have gone to, but if you could go back in time, but what tour did you go to that you enjoyed the best? Thanks again for the podcast. So much appreciated. I have two, one for Van Hagar, one for Van Halen. I would say Nassau Coliseum 1991. I saw Van Hagar, front row, front center, and I paid $250 for the ticket. And I literally was front row, dead